When you hear the name Necati Arabacı, what comes to mind? For law enforcement across Europe, it means organized crime, underground power, and an empire built on fear and money. But before he became one of Germany's most notorious underworld figures, he was simply a child of Turkish immigrants, trying to survive in a country that wasn't always welcoming. Born in 1964, Necati grew up in Germany during a time when Turkish immigrants were arriving in large numbers as Gastarbeiter, guest workers who were brought in to fill labor shortages after World War II. His family, like many others, struggled with poverty, cultural isolation, and the challenges of building a new life in a foreign land. Young Necati learned quickly that the streets had their own rules. In working-class neighborhoods of Cologne, he was exposed to crime, petty gangs, and the harsh realities of immigrant life. While many children of immigrants sought stability through education or factory work, Necati found himself pulled towards something darker. By his teenage years, he was already known to local police. Reports mentioned involvement in street fights, thefts, and small racketeering schemes. But what set him apart was his charisma and ability to command respect from older, tougher men. This natural leadership gave him an edge, and soon, he wasn't just a boy on the streets, he was building a reputation. As the 1980s unfolded, Cologne became a hotspot for nightlife, clubs, and brothels. This was the world where Necati would eventually rise. But his early life, marked by hardship, survival, and a burning desire for power, set the foundation for everything that came later. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Necati Arabacı had transformed from a street hustler into a man with ambition. Germany's underworld was changing fast. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the expansion of Europe's nightlife industry, and the demand for illegal businesses created the perfect environment for men like Necati to thrive. His entry point? The nightclub and brothel scene in Cologne. These were not just places of entertainment, they were centers of money laundering, extortion, and power struggles. Necati understood this better than most. He began associating with figures who controlled these industries, offering protection services that quickly turned into outright domination. By the mid-1990s, Necati had gained control over several red-light businesses. Reports linked him to the Babylon brothel in Elsdorf and later the Wiago club in Leverkusen. These establishments were worth millions of euros and served as more than just nightlife venues. They became hubs for organized prostitution, drug trafficking, and financial crime. What made Necati especially feared was his ruthlessness. Rivals who challenged him often disappeared, were violently beaten, or backed down under intimidation. But at the same time, he cultivated an image of a businessman, someone who dressed sharply, drove expensive cars, and knew how to navigate both the criminal world and high society. By the late 1990s, his empire was estimated to be worth tens of millions of euros. Police surveillance reports painted a clear picture. Necati Arabacı was no longer just a gangster. He was becoming the face of Cologne's organized crime network. By the early 2000s, German authorities could no longer ignore Necati Arabacı's growing empire. Nightclubs, brothels, and protection rackets in Cologne and across North Rhine-Westphalia had one name behind them: Arabacı. Police intelligence reports described him as the shadow ruler of Cologne's red light district. The first major arrest. In 2002, German police made their move. Necati was arrested in a large-scale operation involving heavily armed units. Dozens of properties linked to him were raided, including nightclubs and brothels. He was charged with human trafficking, organized prostitution, extortion, and tax evasion. The trial attracted huge media attention. For the first time, the public saw the man who had been whispered about in Cologne's underworld. Prosecutors painted him as the mastermind behind a multi-million euro prostitution ring, importing women from Eastern Europe under coercion and forcing them to work in his clubs. The court battles. But the case was not straightforward. Witnesses were intimidated, some disappeared, and others refused to testify. Lawyers argued that the evidence was weak, that the entire case relied on frightened women and rival gang members. Despite this, Necati was sentenced to 6 years in prison for organized crime-related offenses. Life behind bars. Prison did not stop his influence. Even inside, reports suggested that he continued to run parts of his empire through intermediaries. Visitors, coded messages, and loyal associates ensured that his grip on Cologne's nightlife remained firm. But prison also brought setbacks. Police bugged the visiting rooms, intercepting conversations that revealed his continued involvement in organized crime. One escape plan was even uncovered, foiled only because of the surveillance devices hidden in the visitor areas. Release deportation. In 2007, after serving part of his sentence, Necati Arabacı was deported to Turkey. German authorities saw this as the only way to get him out of Cologne's criminal scene. But deportation didn't end his story. From Turkey, he allegedly continued to control his network, now operating across borders, building a transnational empire. After his deportation to Turkey in 2007, most thought Necati Arabacı's influence in Germany would fade. Instead, it expanded. Operating from Turkey, he began building what investigators would later call a transnational crime syndicate. His reach extended into Germany, where loyal associates kept his Cologne operations alive. The Netherlands, Belgium, known for their red light districts and lucrative brothel trade. Spain, particularly Majorca, where he invested in nightlife and luxury clubs. Reports linked him to the control of multi-million euro brothels such as Babylon in Elsdorf and Wiago in Leverkusen. Even while absent, his name commanded fear and respect. The Interpol Red Notice. By the 2010s, his operations were no longer a local German issue. Interpol placed him on a red notice, meaning that he was wanted internationally for arrest and extradition. The charges included human trafficking, organized prostitution, money laundering, tax evasion. This made him one of the most notorious Turkish German underworld figures in Europe. Life in luxury, while wanted. Despite being internationally wanted, Necati Arabacı did not live like a fugitive. Media reports placed him in Antalya, Turkey, living in luxury villas, driving supercars, and investing in legitimate-looking businesses as covers. Journalists reported that he often appeared at upscale clubs surrounded by bodyguards, showing little fear of being arrested. His explanation was simple. Turkey does not extradite its own citizens. This loophole allowed him to live openly, while still maintaining influence over his empire in Germany and beyond. Influence in organized crime. Criminal analysts often described Arabacı as part of the Turkish Mafia diaspora, a network of Turkish-origin crime bosses operating across Europe. His organization allegedly had ties to drug trafficking routes through the Balkans, illegal gambling in Germany and Spain, prostitution networks across Western Europe. His name was whispered in police briefings whenever discussions about human trafficking in Europe came up. German authorities, a persistent hunt. Even after Arabacı's deportation to Turkey, German prosecutors never closed his file. They continued to investigate his associates in Cologne, Düsseldorf, and Leverkusen. Police raided multiple properties linked to the Arabacı clan, uncovering evidence of prostitution networks and money laundering. German officials publicly labeled him as one of the most dangerous organized crime figures in Europe. However, their biggest frustration was legal. Germany issued arrest warrants, but Turkey refused extradition. This created a deadlock in international law enforcement. Interpol's standpoint. Interpol's red notice meant Arabacı was flagged at every border in Europe. But because he stayed in Turkey, the warrant remained symbolic. International police conferences highlighted his case as an example of how globalization fuels organized crime. How legal loopholes allow fugitives to live comfortably. Media public perception. The European press often portrayed Arabacı as a Teflon Don of Germany, untouchable despite overwhelming evidence. Headlines painted him as a nightlife kingpin controlling brothels and clubs, Mafia boss who lived like a celebrity in Antalya, international ghost wanted everywhere but safe at home. This made him both a folk villain and a symbol of how difficult it is to control organized crime across borders. European law enforcement collaboration. By the mid-2010s, German police began cooperating with Dutch authorities to track his influence in Amsterdam's red light district. Illegal gambling in Germany and Spain. Prostitution networks across Western Europe. His name was whispered in police briefings whenever discussions about human trafficking in Europe came up. German authorities, a persistent hunt. Even after Arabacı's deportation to Turkey, German prosecutors never closed his file. They continued to investigate his associates in Cologne, Düsseldorf, and Leverkusen. Police raided multiple properties linked to the Arabacı clan, uncovering evidence of prostitution networks and money laundering. German officials publicly labeled him as one of the most dangerous organized crime figures in Europe. However, their biggest frustration was legal. The pressure builds. By the late 2010s, international frustration peaked. German lawmakers debated stricter laws to deal with criminals who exploit non-extradition loopholes. Interpol renewed calls for cooperation, but the political complications remained. Arabacı became a case study in how organized crime thrives when legal systems clash. A symbol of untouchability, Necati Arabacı's story has become more than just that of a criminal. it has become a symbol of how global crime networks survive in the modern world. Despite decades of police investigations, international warrants, and media exposure, Arabacı managed to maintain a life of luxury in Turkey, appearing almost untouchable. His name is often mentioned alongside notorious figures like Pablo Escobar and John Gotti, not for the same scale of violence, but for his ability to evade justice while operating in plain sight. Influence on organized crime in Europe. Arabacı's rise showed that organized crime had evolved. It was no longer only about street gangs or drug lords, it had become sophisticated, corporate, and international. He demonstrated how brothels, clubs, and legal businesses can be used to launder millions. His network highlighted the blurred lines between crime, nightlife, and politics. Younger criminals in Germany and beyond looked to him as a role model of success in the underworld. Current status in Turkey. As of the latest reports, Arabacı is believed to be living comfortably in Turkey. He has been spotted in Antalya's luxury resorts, dining at high-end restaurants. Despite multiple red notices, Turkey's refusal to extradite its citizens means he remains safe from foreign law enforcement. There are unconfirmed reports of his continued involvement in nightlife businesses, though officially he maintains a low profile. Law enforcement lessons. For European police and lawmakers, the Arabacı case became a turning point. It forced debates about extradition treaties and how fugitives exploit them. It highlighted the need for cross-border financial tracking to fight money laundering. It showed the limits of Interpol's reach when politics are involved. Legacy, fear, respect, and mystery. Arabacı's legacy is complex. To the authorities, he remains a fugitive crime lord. To rivals, he was a fearsome competitor who controlled territories with ruthless efficiency. To some communities in Turkey, he is remembered as a man who invested money, created jobs, and lived lavishly. But above all, his story is a reminder of the gray zone where crime, business, and politics intersect. Closing thoughts. Necati Arabacı's tale is still unfolding. He has never been fully brought to justice, and his networks, though weakened, still echo across Europe's underworld. His name continues to be whispered in Germany's nightlife, in Spain's resorts, and in Turkey's high society circles. Whether remembered as a criminal mastermind, a business genius, or simply a ghost of the underworld, one fact remains clear. Necati Arabacı carved his name into Europe's organized crime history, and his shadow still looms large. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, thumbs up, share anti-clockwise arrows, and comment speech balloon your thoughts below. Your support helps us bring more hidden stories of the underworld to light.